Hello, everybody. Well, what do they say? Better late than never. Finally, I'm sitting down to give this a shot. And I thought to myself, I've got so many subjects that I can talk about, but wanted to make it interesting. Keep it on a level of without boredom, shall we say? Anyway, I thought I'd go back to some of the stories that went into my book and some of the surrounding background to them. When I wrote the book with the plan to originally to write a cowboy book, and I made a decision out of the blue to change that because I had so many other stories that I could provide into a book that were from my youth. I had a rather unique youth, being raised in darkest Africa. There are so many events and happenings that took place during my youth that I realized I could fill several books with stories and still have more to go. But the basis of the book, the African Sunsets settler story, really I incorporated my grandparents, my parents, and myself into a storyline, primarily because some of them were my experiences personally. Some of them were experiences my mum and dad had, and of course my grandparents, who were the one of the very first settlers in Kenya in East Africa, which basically was a very interesting, challenging time for somebody to leave England and go and emigrate to the colony and try to establish a new lifestyle. They were wonderful people. They had a spirit in them that I've tried to convey through the book. Um, that survival spirit, that adventure, and all that goes around it. And I had a grandfather who was a particularly incredible human being. He was obviously a master brewer, one of the very first master brewers in the world, and he took his skills out to make beer in Africa. One of the casualties of that was that over the years of making beer and enjoying the beer with his friends and compadres and all his acquaintances over the years, he wasn't an alcoholic, but he did drink beer. But he became severely diabetic. And years later, I remember um, the diabetes took its toll because he got gangrene in his legs below the knee. And initially, it started in the feet and ankles, and then it went up to just below the knee. So they had to amputate both legs below the knee. Now, this was a guy who was big, like kind of me, and he was so determined that I always remember they had moved from what we called the castle house, which was the house I described in the book with the turrets and all the wonderful facade that made it look like a castle, down to a single story. But it was a big single story, probably about 4 or 5 thousand square foot, with a veranda that circumferenced it all the way around. And so what he did was several things, but after the amputation, he was very angry, if you want to call it that, as a human being, because being restricted like that must have been devastating, of course. So he he had them put a rail around the whole veranda in the middle of the ceiling and attach it to the beams as you go round. And then he attached a harness, or, and the harness was attached to it so that he could be lifted into the harness And with the prosthesis that they gave him, which were very, I'm going to call it inadequate in those days, they were basically sort of imitation legs, plastic with leather strapping that goes around the knee. And the knee was bandaged, and so caused blisters and God knows what else. And it was an awful thing to have to do. But he insisted on putting them on every single day, going in the harness, and he would have the African houseboy, Maturi, used to go around with him, and they would have a ratchet on the harness that they could lower it a little bit. And they lowered it a little bit, and each day he would add more of his body weight to the prosthesis as he tried to walk. And he tried to walk around the entire veranda to teach himself to get balance and to walk on the prosthesis on their own. Took him a long time. I remember as a kid going to visit my grandparents, and you'd see this guy out on the patio, and he'd be walking. And at the time, he'd have two sticks, which he would use to go with the harness because balance was the biggest challenge of all for him. And as he went along, time passed, and he was able to slowly but surely, number one, get rid of the sticks, and the prosthesis was then not the prosthesis, the harness kept lowering until eventually he had no support from the harness other than it was around him for security purposes, and he was able to walk. And I remember the day that after many months of perseverance, he went out onto the veranda one morning, and with the assistance of Matori, he helped lift him up to his legs, and without the harness, he initially started to walk with just two sticks, two canes, and he hobbled around the whole veranda. Over time, he got rid of the sticks, and he was able to walk without any assistance other than his prosthesis. And from then on, there was no holding the guy back. He was a go, and would walk around with just his legs, uh, the imitation legs. And to finish the job off, he had a thing about cars and loved the big American cars, and so he would have a brand new American car shipped from America every year to the house. Uh, Excuse me, sorry about that. To the house so that he could drive it. Well, of course, after he'd lost his legs, that was a kind of a non-issue because even though they were automatic, they still required legs and feet to drive with. So he ordered a set of remote control mechanisms to add to the steering wheel, and basically modified the car so it could be only driven with the hands instead of using any legs. And that's how he taught himself to drive again. And so he was driving without any use of his legs at all. And off he went. And I remember he was such a fighter. And I guess as a grandson, you inherit some of that stuff as you go through life. And I found that in my own life, I've needed and enjoyed the resilience that I inherited from him, and I thank him for it. My grandmother, on the other hand, was a little lady. She was a little lady from Lancashire, and just the most bubbly, enjoyable human being you could ever be with. I love my grandmother. As a grandson, she would joke with you and just be wonderful. And her, her way of keeping her grandkids in check was to, if you, because we used to be a little bit, I'm going to call it cheeky, which is the English word for a little bit sassy, I guess would be the best word. And if you were sassy to grandma, or we called her Ma, she used to come up and she would pinch you, give you a big pinch on your arm, and it would hurt. And we would cower back for a minute, and she would laugh. She would laugh so loud, and it was hilarious. But that was her way of keeping her grandkids in check, and she did it with humor. And every grandkid loved her for doing that, whatever it was. And I related to her a bit in my book, and they were true stories. I always remember she was the best negotiator I ever met, and if I learnt any negotiating skills in my life, it was from my grandmother. She was amazing. And the Indian traders that we used to meet in the stores in town, they absolutely loved her too, because those. Oh my! I'm so sorry. I've got these um, things coming on all the time. So the that was the funny side of the whole thing. She just went in the stores, she'd negotiate with them, they'd love it. And if she didn't negotiate, they were really disappointed with her. So it was kind of fun. Anyway, I'm just recounting a story today, and I'm going to not bore you any further today, but hope you have a great day. I'll do another one very soon and keep varying the content. So hopefully I won't bore you to death, and we can enjoy sharing some fun stuff. Anyway, have a great day. Bye bye.